I think we'll call this one Kettlebell Swing Diagnosis. Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Wow. Okay. Looking forward to a great week. We got a pretty good Q&A for this morning. If those of you who like to swing the kettlebell and ever have any questions or concerns about some technical issues, we've got one that's a little bit more specific to address. And this question comes from Annie. And Annie says, I've noticed many of my clients, even the very mobile and symmetrical folks, tend to lose right side midfoot contact during kettlebell swings in the midway point of the hinge on the descent of the kettlebell swing. I'm wondering if this is a problem with the right hip missing some internal rotation. I'm thinking if the right hip is missing the kind of IR it needs for a deep squat or something further down the knee in the ankle complex, and perhaps a bit of end range right hip extension too. However, extension looks, and Annie puts looks in quotation marks, looks normal left and right. What are the common causes and systems to properly address it? Is it even a problem? And thanks for all you do and I never stop learning from your content. Thanks, Annie. I appreciate it. Hey, this is a really good question because I think it's really, really common. And so what Annie did is she actually sent me a video representation of what she's asking about. And she didn't know the rights to it, so she did send it to me though. And so what I did is I actually duplicated it, and so it looks something like that. And so I'm just going to let this run for a second so you can kind of see it, put it in slow-mo to make it a little bit easier to see. And so there's some interesting findings here that are not all that uncommon. And so, but first let's consider what we really need to execute this kettlebell swing effectively. So there's 2 points in a kettlebell swing where motion has to actually stop and change direction. So what that means is that we have 2 propulsive efforts in every kettlebell swing. Now, propulsion is an IR bias, and so what IR means is that we actually have to produce force into the ground at those 2 points. Otherwise, we don't really get a turnaround in this kettlebell swing. So we have to consider the key elements of our propulsive phase, which means that we want to start from the ground up. So we have to have a middle propulsive foot. And so let's go back through our foot contact here. So if I think about an early propulsive foot, I've got a tibia that's externally rotated, and the tibia is actually behind the malleolus here. And what I have to be able to do though is I have to bring this tibia towards internal rotation, and I have to have an arch that will go downward. But I also have to maintain contact with my first metatarsal head here and my big toe here. And so that's our middle propulsive foot. And so if we lose that contact, then we really don't have a really strong middle propulsion from the ground up. And so if we see in the representation of Annie's question, what we actually see is we see an ER position of the foot. So we actually lose that medial heel contact. We lose the first metatarsal head. And so in this case, it looks like we're actually producing force into the ground in external rotation, which really isn't possible because external rotation actually moves us away from the ground. It's an expansive strategy, which actually lifts us up and reduces, this is a weird one, it reduces your total density, which is kind of interesting. So we're not really producing force in external rotation. So to stop the motion, that means that we have to have a compensatory strategy somewhere. And so if we don't have hip internal rotation, if we don't have a middle propulsive foot, then what we have to do is we'll compensate with what is traditionally referred to as spinal extension. And what this actually is, it's a substitution for this distribution of internal rotation bias through the system. And so we're going to see the spine extend in multiple places, which is typically going to be a diagnosis of a posterior lower compressive strategy in the thorax and in the pelvis. So what you're going to see is that concentric orientation below the level of the trochanter. You're going to see concentric orientation below the level of the scapula in the thorax. You're also going to see it up into the cervical spine, which you'll also be able to identify by head position as people are swinging their kettlebell. Now, how does this happen? Well, so people will present with these strategies because this is just a gravitational management strategy. So they may actually walk in the door with it, or it's a coaching error. And so this is really, really common. It's a concept that gets coached inappropriately in my mind with, say, a deadlift or any kind of hingey kind of stuff where they're trying to hit the end range rather aggressively, like a glute bridge, and then like a bilateral hip thrust, really common in a bilateral hip thrust. And so what happens is as you're coaching this hard end range hip extension, you're actually moving the pelvis between the femurs. You're moving it forward between the femurs, and to get into that position, I actually have to re-ER the hip. And so instead of driving forces into the ground through this middle propulsive foot, what we end up with is this ER position throughout the system, and then we have to promote some form of substitution. So if you were to do like a glute bridge or a hip thrust or something like that, you see somebody's knees going out rather aggressively at this end range of hip extension. Understand that you're actually promoting this concentric orientation in this posterior lower. Now, if that's what you desire, then more power to you. I just want you to understand that what you're actually doing. So now, how do we manage this thing? Okay, so go back to last week. Look at the narrow ISA endgame video. There's a series of strategies that will help you alleviate some of this concentric orientation that you're dealing with in the posterior lower pelvis and thorax. Now, we can also use some of our split squat variations. So if you use a contralaterally loaded split squat, so contralateral to the front leg side, what this is actually going to allow you to do, it's actually going to allow you to more easily move that lead hip into internal rotation. Now, when you come out of this, because of the loading strategy, you're actually going to overload the external rotation moment as you come out, which is concentric orientation. But if you hang on to the middle propulsive foot, so big toe, first head, medial heel on the ground, you're actually going to teach them how to maintain the IR bias under load. So you're actually going to teach them how to capture this middle propulsive strategy. Once you can do that, then you want to superimpose some velocity on top of it, because we're talking about a very dynamic, explosive type of propulsive exercise like a kettlebell swing. And so we have to superimpose velocity, otherwise they're going to fall back into the old strategy of trying to substitute with spinal extension. We don't really want that. And so what you can do is you use a split variation of your kettlebell swing. So this is a swing that's on a diagonal from the split stance. And so again, we're using the same strategy we just used in the split squat to capture the IR and then maintain the middle propulsive foot on the ER. So Annie, I hope this helps you. I hope it answers your question. If it doesn't, please ask me another question at askbillhartman@gmail.com. Everybody have a fabulous Monday, and I will see you tomorrow.